Hello and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret, and today I am talking to Mr. Chazz, whose mission is to help adults truly see, guide, and trust children. He is a consultant, parenting coach, conscious discipline practitioner, and content creator. His podcast, Learning Curve, is now part of the Adalist Media Network, and it gives listeners tips for fostering patience and empathy for both themselves and the kids in their lives. Welcome, Mr. Chazz.
Thank you for having me.
Amy and I have been fans of yours for a long time, so we're absolutely thrilled that your new podcast, Learning Curve, is now with Adalist Media. And let's go back. Let's talk origin story, as we like to do with our guests. So many people know you from social media, talking about how to guide kids. But where did this start for you? How did this passion start for you?
Oh, yes. Let me give you the short version.
Yes, you can take us all the way back. Start wherever it works.
Okay. I'm going to start when I started working with children. I think I could definitely go back further
Sure.
to my own childhood, but I don't think anything happens by accident. But I started off working in a Montessori classroom, children ages 3 to 5. And when I started, I really didn't know what to do. I would go into situations where children might have been like arguing and bickering, and I'd try to help them. And by the time I was done with them, they'd be fighting and throwing hands.
As Amy often says, when you enter the fight, now 3 people are fighting as opposed to 2 people.
Yeah. And I was 100% that third person. And, I recognized spending time with children, I recognized the gravity of what I was doing and the importance of growing the next generation of humans. But I didn't know how to actually do that. So I had all the best intentions, but I didn't have the skills to match my intentions. So I decided to really dive deep into just figuring out a better way, figuring out a better way to guide children in a healthy and effective way. And that's really when my journey started. And it was full of mistakes and mishaps and conflict. But all along the way, all those moments really helped me grow and become better and better. The kids who challenged me the most are the kids who helped me grow the most. And now I just share that online, just through social media.
You talk a lot about this idea of conscious discipline. It's something that comes up in your work. Tell us what that phrase means and how you apply it.
Yeah. It's really about, so what we have a tendency to do is something happens, there's some kind of stimulus, something in our outside world doesn't go our way, or we perceive some kind of threat and we react to it. Often unconsciously, without very much awareness. And often our reactions have a lot more to do with how we've been reacted to rather than what our intentions are and what we want to do and how we want to help, the other person, the child, our partner, our peer. And what conscious discipline is all about doing is creating some space between that stimulus and reaction. And us
for
pausing.
ourselves, correct? The stimulus for ourselves and our own reaction, or the reaction of the child are we talking about?
Well, I mean, sometimes what the child is doing, but also sometimes, what our mother or mother-in-law said, or the fact that we're in line, or the fact that we're in traffic, or the fact that, things are just not going our way, something in the world. It could be our child. And the children definitely have a way of pushing our buttons for sure. But it is just whatever it is, it's our ability to really manage our own emotions and respond as opposed to react in a conscious way. And discipline has a connotation of, trying to make the other person feel bad so they learn a lesson.
Break them down, right.
Right. So they learn a lesson, and that negative experience is supposed to somehow teach them what to do instead, but often it doesn't. It leaves them feeling it's actually often counterproductive to our goal of teaching children what to do as opposed to what not to do. And really discipline means to teach. So really to kind of condense all of that, it's us being intentional about our actions so that we can be intentional about what we're teaching children.
Right. And I kind of like the idea that it contains the word discipline, although I agree with you that it's a word that has connotations that are sometimes confusing and sometimes feel very negative, but I know sometimes when we talk about bringing in mindfulness or consciousness practices into discipline or into child rearing, that sometimes people of a different generation, but even sometimes people of my generation and the generation below me kind of get a little bit of like a woo woo feeling and like, oh, well, I guess we just let kids do whatever they want nowadays. And back in my day, we knew how to raise children, but nowadays we're so worried about their feelings that nobody's getting any discipline. But it's really not your goal to say, let's take discipline out of the equation because people, especially children, do need some sort of boundaries and support with their behavior, right?
For
But
sure.
to add an element that is not the kind of discipline that is like, you step out of line, I smack you down either physically or emotionally, because that's the only interaction I understand. Is that a good kind of summary of what you're talking about?
Yeah. And I would actually expand on that a little bit more, especially as you talk about how, people of different generations will sometimes say, hey, I don't want to, I know my parents spanked me or they, verbally shamed me a lot. And that's, I don't want to do that.
Mhm.
And so sometimes we just think about what we don't want to do, what we don't want to do, what we don't want to do.
Mm.
And we don't focus enough on what to kind of replace that with. What do we
Mhm.
do instead? And that's actually still a part of these generational cycles that I talk about, which are these kind of patterns of behavior that come from the more traditional child rearing fear and control based practices, because the fear and control based practices and the more traditional way of discipline is more, don't do this, don't do this, stop doing this. If you do this, then I'm gonna, hurt you in some way. And it's really focused on don't on what not to do. And so then
Mm.
we become parents and it's like we still have that focus on what not to do as opposed to
Mhm.
learning what to do instead. And that conscious discipline is a framework, a very specific framework that has many, many, many strategies on what to do instead. And so I spent a lot of time teaching parents and teachers and people in general what these strategies are, because yes, they're it's more focused for children and parents and teachers, but these strategies, these skills are important for navigating healthy relationships, all of them, all of our healthy
Yeah.
relationships. It's for navigating life. And so they aren't just applicable to the parent child relationship or the teacher child relationship. They're applicable to all relationships.
Yeah, I think that's right because I'm really glad you said that, and I feel like that's right. That the spare the rod, spoil the child sets up a binary that is false. That like the rod, meaning either hitting your child or just really breaking them down, the only other option is a spoiled child. And what your work and your podcast especially explores is it's not it's not a binary. There's a lot of ways to approach a child that are successful that don't have to be fear-based. And I think that's work that all of us want to be doing. So when we come back from this break, we're going to talk a little bit about why those cycles can be really hard for us to break. I'm talking to Mr. Chazz, and his podcast is Learning Curve. We'll be right back. So, Mr. Chazz, we agree and understand that there are alternatives to a fear-based or a very kind of high control version of parenting our kids. And one of the things that you talk about, and we have talked about it on the podcast, but I think it's something I wish we talked about even more, like, is the idea of breaking generational cycles. And you talk a lot about, and we have yours used this term on the podcast, ACEs childhood. Can
Mm-hmm.
you define that for us, for people who might not be familiar with the term, and talk about that as a starting place of how sometimes we get into bad generational cycles with our kids.
Yeah. So when you said ACEs, you're referring to the adverse childhood experiences. And pretty much what this is we can tell based on how many adverse childhood experiences you've had, generally speaking, other hardships that you're going to endure later in life.
Mm.
Now, this being said, the one thing that we can do, because I get this question all the time of just like, my child has had ACEs and like, is it too late? Is it, or maybe my partner is perpetrating some of these adverse childhood experiences on my child. Are they just ruined? Like I'm trying to use this more connected and collaborative based approach, but my partner's not doing it. And so like, is all hope lost?
Right.
And the one thing that we know, the thing that separates the people who aren't able to overcome those adverse childhood experiences isn't just, personal grit and just like, I just happen to be born this way. The number one factor is they had one healthy adult relationship.
Mm.
And that will buffer the impact of the trauma. Now, not to say that it completely eliminates the trauma, because the trauma is like those experiences we carry that with us.
Mm.
But to say that that healthy adult relationship will help us overcome those challenges and those hardships that we're experiencing. And so that is the number one thing. So when it comes to breaking generational cycles, which are really just these unhealthy patterns of behavior that have been, very well researched, it really does. It's not an easy process.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to break all the generational cycles in one go. And that's a really important thing for us to recognize, because another generational cycle is this cycle of perfection, right? We experienced, whenever we made a mistake, we experience maybe harshness, maybe spankings, maybe shaming, maybe these kind of verbal lashings, as opposed to mature empathy. And so because of that, we, one of the things we might struggle with is perfection. When we make a mistake, we have a hard time self-regulating for ourselves. And part of that self-regulation is the inner voice. And our inner voice often comes from the way we're responded to. And so when we're trying to self-regulate and empathize with this child in front of us, we have the cycles are the inner voice from our, the adults in our life, from how we were reacted to. So it makes it very difficult for us to break those generational cycles.
And I think that's so hopeful, because I know in talking to so many of our listeners and guests that we've had on, that sometimes that journey feels, when you feel as a parent that you're starting from not having great moral models, or feeling that you haven't been parented well yourself, that it can feel just like a huge groping mystery that many other people seem to have the solution to. And I think what you capture so well is that there's no one who has all the solutions, but that we can take steps. And one thing I want to just click on for people who might be hearing terms like conscious and stuff, and maybe it doesn't totally resonate with them, they don't know that vocabulary. Can you give us just a very practical example of what it looks like to move from like a fear-based parenting, or maybe a domineering, I don't even know the terminology for that kind of parenting we might be trying to move away from, to a conscious parenting? Like, what is an example from both of those categories?
Yeah. Let's actually just use an example, use a very common practical example. Common situation is, especially if you have more than one child, children hit each other, right? There are sibling fights all the time. And let's say there is a scenario where maybe let's say around the same age, 5 to 3-year-old, let's say a 5-year-old brother and a 3-year-old sister, because often we like to have children in 2 years apart. That's the thing for some reason.
Don't point any fingers. I have 3 that are all 18 months apart.
Okay. right? It's a very common thing. So that's why I'm using the example. Um, so let's say the older brother, 5-year-old brother hits 3-year-old sister because maybe 3-year-old sister also maybe wanted the toy that the 5-year-old brother was playing with, and so she tried to snatch it from him, and he reacts by hitting her. And so what the kind of traditional way, what happens is usually the 3-year-old is like, he hit me, and then we kind of get in this maybe emotional state or survival state, and we react. And maybe the mama bear comes out and it's like, I need to protect this smaller child. You're not supposed to be hitting your sister. And we come at it from a judgmental, reactive point of view.
Mhm.
And we might go over when the sister comes crying, like, you know better than to hit your sister. You're supposed to be an example. What's wrong with you? Hitting is not okay. And then it might go into, I'm taking away your toys, no more screen time, no outside time. If you hit again, then I'm going to spank whatever it is, right? And he
Mhm.
may not say all of those things, but she might say some of those
You
things,
might pull
or
one or two from the shelf. Yes.
yeah, right? Or something in those category where you're reacting, you're putting your emotions onto the child because you're upset about what happened. And you want the other child to feel bad, and you're constantly talking about what they shouldn't do, and you're judging them and shaming them and all those things, right? And that is a very common thing for us to do. It doesn't get us closer to solving the actual thing that you're upset about. It's just verbally attacking. And again, these patterns that we received when we were young, they get carried into all of our relationships
Mhm.
and makes it hard for us to have healthy relationships, which are the most important thing to having a healthy, fulfilling life, right? You can have all the money you want in the world and be the smartest person in the world, but if you don't have relationships and people who you can talk to, who you feel close to, you feel connected with, you feel safe with, then it's likely that you're still going to have a probably just as hard of a time, if not harder time, than the person who is in poverty but does have those relationships.
And so what does that connected conscious response look like?
Yep. So let's go back to the situation. Um, so instead of reacting, what we can do instead is first recognize in that moment we're going to be triggered, right? You're going to likely be triggered down to an emotional state because the what triggers us to go into emotional state is the world not going our way, right? And you probably were doing that's not how you wanted your probably afternoon or evening to go. You probably wanted to cook dinner or clean up or spend time just having a peaceful home, right? Is that like is that so much to ask? But then it gets interrupted by the conflict. And there in this moment, there are also probably things that are coming up. I had named some of them, but things that are coming up that are triggering us to react in this way. And
Mhm.
so what we want to do instead is pause. First, pause because reactions happen really
Such an
fast.
important part. That's the part that I forget. Pause.
And it's only really it's really the first part because in that pause, I say stretch the reaction into a response. Because in that pause, there are going to be some things that you want to do so that you can uh, uh, respond in the most helpful way using all of the best skills that you have in your tool belt.
Mhm.
So first pause, then recognize that you are actually, recognize and you're pausing to recognize that you're actually triggered in this moment.
Mhm.
Take a moment, and I would say just take a breath. And even this part, I know it's a very common thing, pause, stop, and take a breath. But most of us don't even know how to breathe, you know, and in a way that actually benefits our body. And so the way that you breathe in a way that benefits your body, I'll give you the short version. It's in through your nose, out through your mouth. You want your belly to expand on the in breath through your nose, and your out breath needs to be longer than your in breath through your nose for you to get the maximum benefits of actually breathing. Sometimes you breathe like, that's just
Right.
only going to dysregulate you even more and keep you in the lower centers of your brain in a more reactive state. So that's the first thing. Pause, take a breath, and then recognize what you're feeling. Because again, part of what stops us from this is that we grew up with the You're fine. Get over it. Like, it's no big deal. Just like deal with it. And to really just shove our emotions down and to
Mm-hmm.
ignore our emotions. But that's the opposite of what we want to do. Dan Siegel, Tina Payne Bryson coined the term, you have to name it to tame it. And the
Yes.
idea behind this is that you have to be able to name the emotion so that you can tame the emotion. But part of what stops us from naming it and taming it is that we don't even claim it. We're like, we're
Mm-hmm.
fine. I'm fine. No, I'm not mad. I'm fine. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you can name it and tame it first, you have to claim it.
Mm.
So recognizing what you're feeling and really like, I mean, the sensations in your body, like, is it or your face getting hot, or your fingers, you're clenching your fist? Do you feel it in your gut? Do you feel it in your chest? Like, really becoming conscious, aware of what you're feeling in that moment, right? And all while you're breathing. And these are really the first three steps. And these first three steps, to me, are the easy steps. The next two steps I'm going to tell you are the more I find to be more difficult to do in the moment. But these first three steps kind of prepare you to do the next two steps.
All
And
right.
so,
I'm going to pause us for a second. We're going
yeah.
to come right back and we're going to finish these last two steps. We'll be right back. I'm talking to Mr. Chazz. His podcast is Learning Curve with Mr. Chazz. Okay, Mr. Chazz, we're back. We have two more steps. We have paused, we have claimed our emotion, we have named our emotion. Did I forget anything from the first three steps?
So, yes, pause, recognize your trigger, number one. Two, take a breath in through your
There we
nose,
go.
out
The
through your
breath.
mouth.
Yes.
Three, recognize what you're feeling, claim it, name it, tame it. Now, four, the hard part is
I had a
choosing.
feeling we needed a break. I knew this was going to be the hardest part.
Yeah. The fourth step, and this is the 5 steps of self-regulation. And this is part of conscious discipline too. But the fourth step is to choose to see it differently.
Mm.
Because often we are telling ourselves that in this situation where, and you notice I haven't even said anything to the child yet, right? This is still the situation.
We're working on ourselves.
Right. And when you get good at it, you'll be able to do this a lot more quickly than when you first started. When you first started, like, and you're learning anything new, it's a little clunky, and you're like, wait, what's that second step? I forgot to breathe. And oh man, I reacted in a way that was like triggered. I could tell by my tone and body language. So it takes some time, takes some practice, but it's so helpful to do. So choose to see it differently, because a lot of times we see the child is just trying to give us a hard time. The child's not trying to give me a hard time. The child's having a hard time. He is a child who doesn't have the skills to navigate the situation in a healthy way, who doesn't know how to respond using their executive state skills and their react using their emotional state skills or survival state skills, which is also what I am working on doing too. I'm working on responding in a more connected, collaborative way using my executive state skills as opposed to using my emotional state or survival state skills. And so there's also a little point of empathy there, that we're all working on this responding as opposed to reacting. And so those are just a few things. And I would say what's helpful for this step is to really think about your mantras and really work on your mantras when you're regulating, everything's going well, so that you can pull on them and remember them and call on them in the heat of the battle when you're emotional. Because it's harder to think of these things,
right,
to see them as, having a hard time as opposed to giving me a hard time, to see that instead that this is really a case of lacking skills as opposed to just trying to hurt their little sister, that they're having a hard time setting a boundary, as opposed to they're just want to hurt their little sister because they're, whatever label we want to put on them.
Right.
And so that is, again, that's why I find it to be the hardest, because sometimes even doing those first 3 steps, I can still want to see it as they just want to hurt everyone, and you still have all these negative patterns in that inner voice from when we grew up. Like, oh, they're not even trying. They're not even trying the skills that I've been trying to teach them.
Right.
right? And they're just trying to be mean. If I don't nip this in the bud right now, if I don't hurt them right now, if I don't yell at them right now, they're going to think that it's okay to hit people. They're going to think it's okay to hit women. And these are the things that are coming up. And we need some healthier messages
Mhm.
that are honestly more accurate to and really see the child through the lens of positive intent, seeing the best in the child to bring out the best in the child so that we can respond in a way that's helpful for them, in a way where they learn to set the boundary with their little sister as opposed to hitting their little sister, where they learn how to pause themselves and take a breath as opposed to just reacting, where they learn the skills of assertiveness, empathy, the skill of composure, the skill of positive intent, where they learn these skills because not only are we teaching them through direct instruction, but we're also modeling these skills. We're practicing what we're preaching because the do as I say, not as I do is ineffective at best and harmful at worst.
So we've paused, we've breathed, we've understood what's going on with us. We've changed our story using a mantra that we've practiced offline, right? Which is like, my kid's having a hard time and let me access that for him. Or this is a good kid who's maybe engaging in some bad behaviors as opposed to, uh-oh, my kid is terrible or bad. And then what do we actually say or do that's different than what's wrong with you, or I'm going to hit you back to teach you a lesson? Like what is that? What do we verbalize in those moments?
Yes. So fifth step is coming up with win-win solutions.
Mm,
So now that we're in a more executive state ourselves and we're seeing it differently. We're seeing it as they're lacking skills. We are in a better position to actually approach them and help them. And when I do this, I do these steps as I'm walking to them. I'm breathing, I'm saying the mantras, I'm doing all of that all on my way over to the child, right? And
mm,
so once I get to the child, my energy is different than if I didn't do those steps, right? Because children catch our energy, and if we bring chaos to the situation, we're going to add chaos to the situation. So
absolutely.
so already by the time I get there, I'm already giving a sense of safety, a sense of connection. And then I might say something. Now this is where all the skills in my tool belt can come out and I can use. And there are many, many, many of them. Now, let's say we actually know what happened. Maybe we even saw what happened. Or let's not even go there yet. Because in the original scenario, the child came, 3-year-old came and says, so and so hit me. Okay, so and so hit you, and maybe they're trying to take the toy. So one thing that we can do is help that 3-year-old learn to set a boundary. And
Mm,
these are just one of the many skills that we can do. And what's important too to recognize is that it's not about doing what's the one right thing to do in this situation.
good
It's about
point.
learning all the different skills and all the different things you can do in this situation, seeing the situation for what it is, and then choosing what skill would be most helpful in this moment. And as they respond to different things, and as you know the child more, you know their temperament, and you know like the situation, that can change from moment to moment, and you can use different skills, and they will all learn these skills as you are modeling them. So one, teaching them to set a boundary, because what we have a tendency to do is we go in and we set the boundary and we say, hey,
Right.
you shouldn't do this, and hey, don't do this, and whatever. And then we never give the child an opportunity, the 3-year-old an opportunity to learn how to set a boundary themselves.
Mhm.
So when someone encroaches on their boundary, maybe as they get older, they never learn what words to actually say, right? And they learn to maybe be more passive, as opposed to be able to stand up for themselves and say, hey, I'm not okay with you hitting me. Next time ask for a turn, or say, so in this situation, what I would first set it up and say, hey, were you okay with that? Or did you like it? Just getting the baseline, hey, you weren't okay with what happened. Right. And so,
Mhm.
no, I didn't like it. So I might say, I don't like it when you hit me. And I might, now this child being 3, I'm going to have to probably help facilitate some of these skills. We kind of talk about lending our prefrontal lobe to children. And
I
so,
love that expression.
So part of the boundary isn't just saying, hey, what I don't like. The other part of the boundary is saying what you want the other person to do instead. So in this situation, I might support this 3 year old in saying something like, well, I might ask, what do you want them to do instead? 3 year old may not be able to answer that question, but
Mhm.
I can help give them the words to say, I don't like it when you hit me. Please keep your hands to yourself.
Mm.
Right. And as they get older, I will have to do less of that support and they will be able to use the words themselves. Right. And when we learn to uh, uh, set and respect boundaries, and there's conscious discipline also has tools where you can practice these skills, like physical tools that literally walk the adult and children through the process. But
Mhm.
as you learn, the 5 year old learns to set and respect boundaries too, not just when they're upset, but also when everyone's regulated and in all kinds of situations through teachable moments and direct instruction and our own responses to things. In that situation, when the 3 year old tries to take the toy away from the older brother, now the older brother knows to say, maybe put their hand up and say, stop. I don't like it when you snatch from me, ask for a
Mhm.
return.
And yeah, so let's turn to that 5-year-old for a minute. We're helping the 3-year-old in this scenario, and obviously these play out in a million different ways, lots of solutions. We're helping the 3-year-old set boundaries, and how are we addressing the 5-year-old who is the hitter in that situation?
Yeah. So it all depends. It all depends on what you want to teach. Now, in some situations, you're not going to some in some situations when children hit, it's really more of an emotional like hurt. That is because sometimes it's like it really is a light tap.
Mhm.
Sometimes it is more serious.
Mhm.
So you do have to take those things into account. Like, is this a safety issue, or is this hey, they're crossing a boundary issue? If
Mhm.
they're crossing a boundary, if it's an intrusion on the boundary, what you're going to do is you're going to teach the child how to set the boundary. If it's a safety issue, you're going to respond to the 3 year old. I'll handle it. I got this. Like,
Mm.
I got this. Right now, you go over to the 5 year old and maybe the hitting, and maybe you're at a point where you're talking to the 5 year old again. You're going over and you're not going over and shaming. You're calm. I might start with something like, you want it. You wanted to keep your toy. You wanted to keep playing with your toy, and you didn't want your 3 year old to take it, right? And get to a place of understanding and help them feel understood. You want them to feel safe and understood, and when they feel safe and understood and connected, like they belong to the family unit and they're not being ostracized, then they're going to be open to to learning new skills and solutions and what to do instead. And that at that point, I would say, hey, you wanted your little sister to give you space, or you wanted your little sister to keep her hands to herself because remember the situation started with the little sister taking the toy,
Grabbing the toy, yeah.
right? And they'll like you say, yeah, like that's what I wanted. Like she's always taking things from me or whatever it is. And from that point of understanding, then when they feel understood, then they're going to be so much more open to the guidance we have to offer. So then
Mm.
we might say something, you wanted your sister to keep her hands to herself. Next time, say, stop. Or put your hands like this and say, stop. Or next time, say, I don't like it when you snatch things from me. Keep your hands to yourself. Or I don't like it when you take things from me. Ask for a turn. Right.
Mhm.
Or in some situations that, even when one child is setting a boundary, the other child, maybe because again, due to lack of skills, maybe lack of impulse control, emotional regulation, which are executive state skills that are not fully developed till 25, 26, like they literally don't have the brain capacity. And even when we do have the brain capacity as adults, we still struggle. Um,
Mhm.
uh, we should still teach the child to say, set the boundary. And if they're still not listening to the boundary that you're setting, then come and get me. Right. And I'll help you guys solve the problem. Right. And then you can still facilitate and help them, figure out how to, maybe, and there's a million different solutions for how you might solve the problem. But the point is, everyone feels safe and connected enough to learn new skills and what to do next time in the situation, as opposed to just making them feel bad for not having the skills to navigate that situation this time or the time in the past.
There's the rub right there. And I will say, for people listening, this is work that I learned from doing the podcast, in terms of like consciousness and adding this element to parenting. Having come from a very kind of highly disciplined background, I think I was very resistant to it. And having learned it and practiced it now for, 13, 15 years, it seems kind of cutesy sometimes. It seems like a lot more work than just running over and getting involved and yelling at everyone until they're quiet. But I will say for myself that it's a little more work in the beginning, but it pays such dividends down the line. And I have a child in my life who struggles a lot with executive functioning skills. And I will find myself having a conversation now that goes, you're speaking rudely. And this child will say back, that's a developing skill. I'm still working on it. And it's like, okay, we're both working. It's okay. And the fraughtness of it comes out, I think, the more of this work you do. And I'm so excited to have Mr. Chazz and Learning Curve as part of Atlas Media now, because the way that we find podcasts is that we find podcasts we love and we ask them to come to Atlas Media. And Mr. Chazz's work and the conversations that he's having on this podcast have profoundly changed the way that I parent my children. And I'm so grateful for it. And I hope you all will go check out Learning Curve, because there is so much to learn. And as you can hear, Mr. Chazz's approach is so fun and friendly and non-judgmental, and to me, really, really effective. So I just appreciate your work so much. And this conversation today has only scratched the surface of what you have to offer people in this space.
Very, very true. And I'm going to give you a couple of just little one-liners that might be helpful with you on your journey. That might be just different ways of thinking about things and helping you to choose to see it differently. Because again, that is, I think, for me personally, that is the most difficult part about that kind of the 5 steps of self-regulation.
Yes.
Is choosing to see it differently. So one is, conflict is an opportunity for learning. A lot of times when the conflict happens, we're like, oh, this is just this terrible thing. But when we really see it's this opportunity for learning, and I take it a step further, is that they're having this conflict because they deep down want to learn about maybe boundaries. They deep down want to learn about empathy. They deep down want to learn about composure, right? And want to see how, you're able to model that. And, they will never say that like, hey, I'm going to hit my sister because I want to learn about
deep down. No.
Yeah, right. But it really, in my experience, like that's really what it is. And if we can take the judgment and the shame and help them feel safe and connected and understood, the possibilities for their growth are really endless. That's really what shuts down the learning. I'm going to give you another one. This one's for us. And this is kind of a double one. OOPS stands for our opportunity to problem solve. Or OOPS stands for our opportunity to practice skills. So when we make a mistake, there's no real need for us to like judge ourselves or beat ourselves up. But just see it as, oh, this is an opportunity really to learn and to problem solve and to practice skills. Like, oh, I made a mistake because there's a gap between my skill level and the situation that I'm in right now. And that's okay. That's okay. The reason you were given this situation is so that you could practice the skill. Now you completely have the choice on whether you take that opportunity or not. And sometimes we make so many mistakes in a day. It's like, you know what? I'm going to pass on this lesson. And I completely
no
get
more
that.
Learning for me today. I get there sometimes.
I completely get that. And that's why I always go back to this The number one thing and the most important thing I'll say, and that's why I'm going to repeat it, is that it's avoid being a perfectionist, be an improvinist. The goal is not to be perfect every day. The goal is to improve a little every day. And so if you improve just a little bit, right? Just a little perspective change, or you just try something a little new, or you just say, hey, I'm going to take a moment. I'm just going to breathe today. Maybe you don't even do all the 5 steps, but you just get to step 2. I'm just going to work on my breathing today. And, I may not have the skills to actually navigate the conflict yet. I'll get there, but I'm just going to work on breathing and getting myself into a space where I can use the skills that I'm learning. And they're often new skills because, again, when we were being raised, it was like, it was all just fear and control based. Like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do. There wasn't a lot of teaching us skills and what to do. And the practice of it is might be something that might feel new. And like you said, like, oh, like when I started, it felt kind of like cutesy, and it's 100% not like, I mean, you could definitely get with the connection, all that stuff can be cutesy and you can have fun with it and to whatever level you want to, but this is intense
For sure.
generational work that you're doing. And it's, for me, like, when I envision what I'm doing and how I envision when I see other people do it, like, this is something that requires immense strength, so much more strength than it takes to just lash out. And that's really emotional weakness, because we're allowing, whoever we put in charge of our emotions, we put in charge of us. Right. And I don't know about you, but I don't want a 4-year-old to be in charge of me with their, lack of impulse control and their lack of executive skills. Like, I don't want just them to be able to do whatever they do and that control what I do. I want to be able to be in control of what I do and be able to be intentional about it. And that takes so much strength.
So well said. The podcast is Learning Curve with Mr. Chazz. It is available wherever you find podcasts. You can also find it and all of our podcasts at adalystmedia.com. Mr. Chazz, tell our audience where else they can find you.
You can find me on all social media platforms. Just type in Mr. Chazz, and that's Chazz with 2 Z's. TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, everywhere.
He's all over the place. We will link to everywhere you can find him in the show notes for this episode. Check out the podcast Learning Curve. And Mr. Chazz, what a fantastic conversation. Thanks so much for talking to me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope this helped, and I'll see you on the internet, y'all. Remember, be an improvinist.